Here's a question for you. What if the very systems meant to support your small business are actually holding you back? Think about it. Every regulation, every policy, every line of red tape you navigate, is it helping you grow or just slowing you down? Hello, and welcome back, my fellow entrepreneurs. I'm Kim, your host of Small Business Big AI, the podcast where we cut through the noise around artificial intelligence and tech trends to bring you actionable strategies for growing your business. Now, this is the space for entrepreneurs like you, owners and innovators ready to scale sustainably, leverage cutting-edge tools, and navigate the changing landscapes of policies and regulations in an AI-driven world. Now, together, we're building technology-enabled superpowers, businesses that thrive, not just in the marketplace, but as part of a supportive, forward-thinking economy. Now, today, we're diving into a major shift coming out of Washington, one that could have a significant impact on your small business. That's right, we're talking about regulation and policy reform. Now, before you roll your eyes or hit that skip button, I promise it's not all doom and gloom. Now, last week's episode on the DOGE effect stirred up quite the conversation. Some of your comments were thoughtful and supportive. Others, well, let's just call them a little spirited. But either way, I know many of you will want to stick around to hear what's next. Now, to help us break it all down, I've brought back a special guest. Yes, you guessed it, Hal. Now, together, we'll explore the potential impacts of the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, on small businesses. Think smaller government, big deregulation, and yes, some controversial ideas that are already sparking debate. But most importantly, we'll unpack why it's crucial for small business owners like you to stay informed and engaged in these discussions. So let's get to it. So let me start off by clarifying a few things. The Department of Government Efficiency, despite its name, is an advisory board that aims to identify and eliminate inefficiencies within federal operations.
Yeah, it's interesting because this isn't just some crazy idea. This is something that President-elect Trump, along with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, are actually trying to do. They are calling it DOGE, and a lot of people are really interested in it.
Welcome back, Hal. It's great to have you back on the show for this one.
Yeah, it's been hard to sleep at night with the phone pinging every 5 seconds and blowing up after last week's episode.
Yeah, well, about that. That's why we're tackling some of these issues today. We're going to be really taking a deep dive into something that could have a big impact on small businesses.
Government reform?
Yeah.
So we're talking about potential changes that could really reshape everything from regulations to contracts, even how AI might shake things up for small business.
Yeah, it's a hot topic right now. So to really break this down, we've got a bunch of different sources that we're going to be looking at today, including a roundtable discussion from the All In podcast, one of my favorites, and then an article from the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, some pretty big name tech investors are weighing in on the whole thing.
Yeah, plus, Musk and Ramaswamy. Now, they're not officially part of the government per se. It's more like they're advisors working with the White House and the budget folks. And get this, Hal, they're volunteering their time for this. And they're saying that they're aiming to wrap everything up by July 4th, 2026, which is America's 250th birthday.
Talk about a tall order.
Yeah, that's pretty ambitious.
It's a tight deadline for sure, especially considering the scale of what they're aiming for, because Musk and Ramaswamy want to cut a whopping $500 billion in annual federal spending. And it's not just about cutting the budget either. They're also looking to reduce the federal workforce and cut back on regulations.
Yeah, which is something that a lot of small business owners are probably pretty happy about. So let's break down what that means for you, my small business big AI family. As a small business owner, one of the biggest potential benefits of DOGE is this promise of less red tape. So imagine a world with fewer hoops to jump through when you're starting or running your business.
That's kind of the big idea here. They're arguing that all the unnecessary regulations are stifling the economy, holding back innovation, and making things tougher for small businesses to thrive.
And it's not just theoretical, Hal. They've actually mentioned some very specific targets for these cuts.
Okay, like what?
Like the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and certain international organizations. Now, whether you agree with those particular targets or not, the point is they're trying to make a real dent in what they see as wasteful spending. But it's not just about cutting, right? They're also talking about using AI to make government services more efficient.
Okay, interesting.
Think about things like faster processing time or maybe less paperwork and a more user-friendly experience overall. Making it actually easy to deal with the government.
Exactly. That could be a game changer for small businesses that often get so bogged down in this bureaucracy. Okay, so less red tape, more efficiency, potentially even lower taxes. It all sounds pretty good so far.
Yeah, it does.
But are there any downsides?
It can't all be sunshine and rainbows, right? There are always downsides to consider. Now, one concern is that essential government services could be weakened or even cut altogether.
Yeah, okay. Like what? What kind of things?
Well, for example, what happens to the Small Business Administration or disaster relief programs? These are things that many small businesses rely on. So any cuts to those have really a real impact.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Also, you have to remember that there are some potential conflicts of interest here because, after all, Musk companies SpaceX and Tesla are government contractors.
Yeah, that's true.
So that raises some questions about whether his involvement in DOGE could actually lead to decisions that benefit his own businesses.
Right. Even if it's unintentional.
Yeah, like even if it's unintentional. Transparency is going to be key here to make sure that everything is being done above board.
So it sounds like there's some potential benefits for the small businesses, but also some real concerns. So what's the bottom line here?
Well, Hal, here I think the bottom line is that you have to stay informed. DOGE is still in its early stages and things are going to change rapidly, right? So I'd say keep an eye on policy updates, especially those that affect, your specific industry. And don't be afraid to make your voice heard.
Okay, how do we do that?
Join industry associations or advocacy groups to collectively advocate for reforms that benefit small businesses. It's easy to feel overwhelmed by all of this, but how knowledge is power. Now, the more you understand about what's happening, the better equipped you'll be to navigate the changes and maybe even turn them to your advantage.
That's great advice, and it's true. Government is a big ship. It doesn't turn on a dime. So while DOGE is aiming for fast change, the reality is that it's going to be a longer process.
So now that we've kind of set the stage here, let's dig a little deeper into some of the specific areas where DOGE could have a big impact on small businesses.
Starting with those pesky regulations?
Yeah, everybody loves regulations, right? So one area that, they've highlighted is the process for securing government contracts. And, streamlining that process could be a huge win for small businesses looking to work with the government. And, let's not forget about access to capital, right? They're talking about making it easier for small businesses to get funding, which could really be a game changer for so many entrepreneurs out there. But before we get too excited, we really need to take a look at some of the potential roadblocks and challenges that DOGE might just face.
Right. There's a lot of skepticism out here. And for good reason. We've seen reforms efforts come and go. So it's important to be realistic about the potential for success.
Absolutely, Hal. So let's take a closer look at those challenges, okay? And explore what a more critical perspective might reveal. One of the biggest criticisms of DOGE is that it's too focused on cutting costs and not enough on the quality of government services.
So some would argue that efficiency shouldn't come at the expense of effectiveness.
Yeah, and there's also concerns that slashing regulations could have unintended consequences.
Okay, like what?
Yeah, like harming the environment or worker safety. So, it's important to consider the broader implications of these reforms, not just the immediate impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, I agree. So let's dive into some of those arguments and see what we can uncover. Remember, we're here to clarify a few things. I don't want any more late night cell phone pings.
Okay.
So let's help our audience make some sense of it all and figure out what it means for small businesses.
All right, I agree. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
One of the arguments that we hear a lot from Musk and Ramaswamy is that you have all these unelected bureaucrats and they have way too much power. And they're using that power to create all these regulations that go way beyond what Congress originally intended. And they're saying that it's actually stifling the economy and even undermining democracy itself.
That's a pretty big claim. So they have anything to back it up?
Well, they point to a couple of recent Supreme Court rulings as evidence that the legal tide is turning in their favor. So, one is the case of West Virginia versus the EPA. And this basically limits the power of federal agencies to make these sweeping regulations without clear authorization from Congress.
Yeah, I remember reading about that case. It seemed like kind of a big deal for businesses, especially those in industries with a lot of environmental regulations. So what's the other case?
Well, the other one is even more interesting. It's a long-standing doctrine known as the Chevron deference. This was this legal principle that had basically given federal agencies a lot of leeway in interpreting laws.
Okay, the Chevron differences?
No, Chevron deference.
Oh, break that down. Like in simpler terms.
Okay, so imagine that Congress passes a law about keeping our air clean. And the law might say reduce pollution, but it doesn't give all the details on exactly how much to reduce it. So the Chevron doctrine basically said that the agencies in charge of enforcing that law, like the EPA, they get to figure out just how to put those unclear parts into action. It's kind of like Congress gives the EPA a recipe for a cake, but the recipe just says, add some sugar, and then the EPA gets to decide exactly how much sugar goes in.
So they had the power to kind of fill in the blanks?
Yeah, basically. Mm-hmm.
So with the Chevron doctrine gone, does that mean that these agencies have less power to make those kind of judgment calls?
Yeah, that seems to be what Musk and Ramaswamy are arguing here. That by overturning Chevron, the Supreme Court has shifted back power to Congress, which is the body that's directly elected by the people. And that this new legal landscape, combined with what they see as this clear electoral mandate from Trump's victory, that this creates this perfect opportunity for a major rollback of regulations.
So they're basically saying, look, the Supreme Court is on our side. The voters are on our side. Now let's make some big changes. It's a pretty savvy strategy playing both the legal and the political angles.
Yeah, they seem to be framing this whole thing as a fight against the unelected bureaucracy that's grown too powerful and out of touch. And so their narrative is that by cutting regulations and streamlining government, they'll unleash this economic growth, create jobs and boost American competitiveness on the global stage.
That sounds awfully familiar. Uh, it's that kind of what Milton Friedman was advocating for us.
You know how you're exactly right.
Smaller government, less intervention in the free market.
Yeah, Freeman's idea about free markets and limited government are definitely echoing through this whole DOGE initiative. And it's an idea that resonates with a lot of people, especially small business owners who often feel so burdened by these regulations. But it's worth remembering that even Friedman acknowledged the need for some government intervention, particularly when it comes to things like national defense or protecting property rights.
Right. Yeah. It's not about getting rid of government altogether. It's about that right balance, that sweet spot where government can foster innovation and economic growth without stifling it with all the unnecessary red tape.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where the debate gets really heated because what one person sees as essential government service, another might view it as bloated bureaucracy. It all comes down to your perspective and your priorities.
Yeah, I've heard that they mentioned cutting funding for things like corporations for public broadcasting. Now, some people might see that as wasteful spending, but others would argue that, it's important to support public media. And it's not immediately obvious how those cuts would affect small businesses, but there could be a direct impacts, right?
Yeah, think about it. A lot of small businesses rely on public radio for news and information or to reach potential customers through advertising. I know both of us did back in the days when we were just starting out. And public television can play a role in both education and workforce development, which ultimately benefits the economy as a whole. So even cuts that seem totally unrelated to business can have these ripple effects that are felt in this marketplace.
It's like the old saying, no man is an island. Everything is connected in some way. So even if you're laser focused on your own business, you have to kind of pay attention to what's happening in the wider world because it all comes back to affect you eventually.
Yeah, it does, And that's especially true when it comes to something as complex and interconnected as the government. You can't just look at one piece in isolation. You have to understand how it really fits into the larger system.
Right.
Let's take a quick breather here. If you're enjoying this episode and picking up some valuable insights, make sure to subscribe to Small Business Big AI on your favorite podcast app so you never miss out on future conversations. And hey, if you know someone who could use this information, go ahead and share it with them too. So we've talked about the arguments for smaller government and less regulations, But let's get down to brass tacks, Hal. Now, how might these reforms actually impact small businesses on a day-to-day level? Well, one area where DOGE can make a real difference is government contracting. Now, right now, the process for small businesses to bid on and secure government contracts can be incredibly complex and time-consuming.
Yeah, it's like navigating a maze.
Yeah, and it's a maze of paperwork and regulations. And so DOGE is really aiming to streamline that process and make it easier for small businesses to compete for those very lucrative government contracts.
Right. That would be huge. I mean, so many small businesses rely on government contracts, but the process can be so daunting that a lot of them just give up. So if DOGE can make it simpler and more transparent, it could open up a whole new world of opportunities.
Exactly. And it's not just about getting the contracts, it's about getting paid on time. Government agencies are notorious for slow payments, which can be a real cash flow killer for small businesses. So if DOGE can improve that process as well, it would be a major win.
Absolutely. It's all about leveling the playing field, giving small businesses a fair shot at competing with those bigger companies that have whole departments dedicated to navigating government bureaucracy.
That's the goal at least. But of course, there are always potential roadblocks and challenges.
Of course. So, what kind of roadblocks are we talking about?
Well, one concern is that streamlining the process too much could actually make it harder for small businesses to compete.
How so? I would think less bureaucracy would be better for everybody, big or small.
Yeah, well, some argue that certain regulations are actually in place to protect small businesses, from being squeezed out by larger corporations.
Interesting.
For example, there might be rules about setting aside a certain percentage of contracts specifically for small businesses, or requirements for large companies to subcontract with smaller ones.
So, by simplifying the process, you might inadvertently remove some of those protections that were put in place to help small businesses?
Yeah, exactly. It's a classic case of unintended consequences. You try to solve one problem and you end up creating another one, right? So that's why it is so important to think through these reforms carefully. Consider all the potential impacts, both positive and negative.
So, DOGE is tackling a whole range of issues, from procurement to regulatory reform to workforce development. And each of those areas has the potential to impact small businesses in different ways. So, let's move on to another potential game changer for small businesses, and that is access to capital.
Hal, this is a big one. It is one of the biggest challenges facing small businesses, especially those just starting out, getting the funding they need to grow. Traditional banks are often reluctant to lend to small businesses.
Yeah, especially in risky or uncertain economic times. And even if you can get a loan, the interest rates can be sky high, which can really eat into your profits and make it even harder to succeed.
So according to the article, one of the things that DOGE is looking at is ways to make it easier for small businesses to access capital. Now, this could involve things like loosening accreditation rules or creating new loan programs specifically for small businesses, or even using technology to connect entrepreneurs with investors more efficiently.
So that sounds promising, but I imagine there are also concerns about unintended consequences here.
Yeah, always.
Like if you make it too easy to get a loan, couldn't that lead to more businesses taking on too much debt and ultimately failing?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. There's always a balance to be struck between making capital accessible and ensuring that businesses are taking on debt responsibly. DOGE will really have to walk a fine line there.
And let's not forget about the potential fraud and abuse. Anytime you're dealing with government programs and money, there's always a risk of someone trying to game the system.
You got that right. Absolutely. Transparency and oversight are going to be crucial to ensure that these programs are being used effectively and ethically.
Speaking of ethics, let's circle back to that potential conflict of interest we mentioned earlier.
Okay.
How much of a concern is it that Musk's involvement in DOGE could lead to decisions that benefit his own businesses?
It's definitely something to watch closely. After all, SpaceX and Tesla receive billions of dollars in government contracts. So any changes to procurement processes or regulations could really have a direct impact on those companies. And how it's not just about direct financial benefits, it's also about the potential for Musk to use his position to influence policies in ways that indirectly benefit his businesses. For example, if DOGE were to recommend cuts to funding for public transportation, that could benefit Tesla by reducing competition. Or if they were to push for deregulation of the space industry, that could give SpaceX an advantage over its competitors. Now, these are all hypothetical scenarios, of course, but it's important to be aware of the potential for these kinds of conflicts of interest.
Right. Agreed.
The public needs to be assured that DOGE's recommendations are based on what's best for the country as a whole, not just what benefits a few select companies. And that's where transparency comes in. Now, according to the Wall Street Journal article, they'll be using a leaderboard to highlight wasteful spending and also a podcast to kind of explain their decisions to the public.
Interesting.
But, they need to go even further than that, Hal. They need to be completely open about their methodology, their data sources, and even their decision-making process.
Okay, so they need to show their work, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly.
That way the public can scrutinize their decisions and hold them accountable.
Yeah. As Chamath Palihapitiya says, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Ready to take your small business to superhuman levels with AI? Well, subscribe to Small Business Big AI and start building your technology-enabled superpower today. If you've got questions or just want to continue the conversation, join me over on LinkedIn or Facebook. The info is in the show notes. I'd love to hear what's on your mind as we navigate this AI journey together. And hey, don't stop there. Get engaged. Contact your representatives about business-friendly policies. They're elected to serve we the people, and that includes you.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the rationale behind DOGE, the potential benefits for small businesses, the potential drawbacks, and the importance of transparency and accountability. But let's shift gears now and talk about another key element of DOGE, and that is the use of artificial intelligence to improve government efficiencies.
Yeah, this is my favorite part. Now, this is where things get really interesting and potentially a little scary. AI has the potential to completely revolutionize the way government operates, making it faster, more efficient, and really more responsive to the needs of citizens and businesses.
Okay, it sounds like something straight out of a science fiction movie.
It does a little bit, doesn't it?
So how would that actually work in practice?
Well, Hal, imagine a world where you could file your taxes, apply for permits, or access any government service all through a simple user-friendly app on your phone. No more waiting in lines and no more mountains of paperwork or no more dealing with these grumpy bureaucrats.
Oh, wow. That would be amazing. I can't tell you how much time I've wasted dealing with government bureaucracy.
I know, right? Dealing with government bureaucracy, it's like they're stuck in the Stone Ages or something.
It can feel like that sometimes.
Yeah, and it's not just about convenience, right? AI can also be used to improve the accuracy and efficiency of government processes. For example, it can be used to detect fraud, or identify waste and optimize resource allocation.
Okay, so AI could actually help the government save money and do more with less?
Yeah, that's the idea. Now, it could also free up government employees to focus on more complex and strategic tasks, rather than being bogged down in routine paperwork.
It all sounds very promising, but I'm sure there are some potential downsides to consider.
Of course.
So, what could go wrong with AI in the government?
Well, one concern is that AI systems could be biased, reflecting the biases of the data that they were trained on. And this really could lead to unfair or discriminatory outcomes, especially for marginalized groups.
Kim, that's a serious concern. We need to be very careful about how these systems are designed and implemented in government. What else could go wrong?
Another concern is that if decisions are being made by algorithms that are difficult to understand or audit, it could be harder for citizens to hold their government accountable.
So, even though AI might make things more efficient, it could also make it harder to know who's responsible when things go wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And there's also the risk that AI could be used to erode privacy and civil liberties. For example, facial recognition technology could be used for mass surveillance, or AI powered predictive policing systems could be used to target certain communities unfairly.
These are all valid concerns, and it's clear that we need to have a serious conversation about the ethical implications of AI in government.
Hal, I agree. But, let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater here, okay? So AI has the potential to do a whole lot of good, but we need to be mindful of the risks and we need to take the steps to mitigate them. I agree we need to approach AI with a healthy dose of both optimism and skepticism. We need to be excited about the potential benefits, but also realistic about the challenges.
Sounds like DOGE has its work cut out for it. They're trying to tackle some of the biggest and most complex challenges facing the government today.
Yeah, it is a huge undertaking, but if they can pull it off, the potential benefits for small businesses and the economy as a whole could be enormous.
It's definitely a bold and ambitious undertaking. Only time will tell if they can succeed, but it's certainly a development worth watching closely. It's interesting to think about how we measure something like DOGE. Is it just about the dollars and cents? Or are there other things that we should be considering?
Hal, that's a great question, and it gets to the heart of what we really value as a society. It's easy to get caught up in the talk of cutting budgets and boosting efficiency, but what about the quality of government services? What about fairness and equity?
Right. It's like you can make a car engine more efficiently by removing some parts, but it doesn't run smoothly and it gets terrible gas mileage. What's the point?
If we focus solely on efficiency, we risk overlooking other important values. Now, for example, if cuts to the SBA lead to fewer loans for minority owned businesses, is that a true measure of success? Or if streamlined regulations make it easier for companies to pollute, is that a trade off that we're willing to make?
Maybe it's not just about making government smaller, right? But about making it work better for everyone, especially those who have been historically underserved or disadvantaged.
Exactly. And I think this whole DOGE initiative really highlights the fact that there are a lot of different perspectives on the role of government. Some people want it to be as small as possible, while others, they believe that it has a responsibility to provide a safety net and support those in need.
Right. It's a tough question.
And there's really no easy answer. It's a complex issue with valid arguments on both sides. I think what's important is that we have an open and honest conversation about it and that we consider the potential consequences of our choices.
Well, I think we've done a pretty good job of laying out the different perspectives, arguments in this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground. From the rationale behind DOGE to the potential benefits and drawbacks for small businesses. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your final thoughts.
So before we close, I want to take a moment to acknowledge something truly special. As Thanksgiving approaches, it's the perfect time to reflect on the incredible role small businesses play in our lives. You are the innovators, the job creators, and the hearts of our communities. Now, whether it's the local cafe that fuels our mornings or the tech startup solving problems that we didn't even know we had, small businesses are the unsung heroes of progress and connection. Now, to all the small business owners out there, thank you. Thank you for your resilience, your creativity, and your courage to adapt and innovate, especially in this fast-moving AI-driven era. Now, your hard work inspires not just me, but countless others who rely on your services and products every day. Now, as you gather with family, friends, or even take a well-deserved break, know that you are making a lasting impact, not just in your business, but in the fabric of our shared future. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your loved ones. Let's keep building, innovating, and thriving together.
Okay, Kim, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from today's conversation?
Well, how I think what I find most fascinating about this whole DOGE initiative is that regardless of its ultimate success or failure, it's forcing us to have this much needed conversation about the role of government in our lives. It's challenging assumptions, it's sparking debate, and it's pushing us to think critically about what we want from our government.
I couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that we, the citizens, have responsibilities to engage in this discussion, to hold our leaders accountable, and to advocate for the kind of government that serves the needs of all Americans.
Yeah, and for small business owners in particular, it's a call to action. So stay informed, stay engaged, and be prepared to adapt to the changing landscape.
Right, because the decisions made in Washington, D.C. have a real impact on Main Street. So make sure your voice is heard.
Absolutely, Hal. Now, you can't just sit on the sidelines and wait to see what happens. You have to be proactive and make your voice heard.
That's a great point.
The future is not something that just happens to us. It's something that we create together. Now, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with a fellow entrepreneur who needs a little AI magic in their life. Also, if you've got a story about how AI has helped you, I'd love to hear about it. Reach out and maybe your story will inspire a future episode. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the DOGE effect. Big changes, big questions for small business owners. We hope you found it informative and thought-provoking. Now, we all know that small businesses are the heart and soul of the American dream, and the future belongs to those who are prepared to adapt. Now, because we're not just building small businesses anymore. In the AI era, entrepreneurs are building big. We're building technology-enabled superpowers.
That's a perfect note to end on.
Until next time, keep embracing change, keep innovating, and remember, the future of your business is bigger than you think. And the steps you take today will shape the legacy you build tomorrow. Now, I'm Kim, and this has been Small Business, Big AI. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you in the next episode.